Hello everybody, it's Stephen here for the Idiot Quilter, and welcome to my weekly episode of the Idiot Quilter, and this is episode number 107 for, what's today's date? March the 23rd, 2021. So behind me you can see my latest project that I now have finished. I've shown this to you before as a UFO, and I finally got it quilted, and I quilted it on my new M7, Continental M7 by Janome, and I got to tell you something. Quilting on that machine is great. It's got a 13.5-inch throat, and whereas my 15,000 only had 11 inches, which was still a lot, but 2.5 inches, as I've said before, size matters. 2.5 inches does make a difference. Plus, it has a really nice extended table to it that's a little bit wider than what I had on the 15,000. And it goes all the way from edge to edge as well, which is really, really nice. The one for the Janome 15,000 was a little bit short simply because it had to accommodate for the embroidery arm. But now that this machine does not embroider, it's just strictly a sewing machine designed for quilters, I don't have to worry about that anymore. So let's take a little closer look here at this quilt. Bring my microphone over with me, and this is the one where I appliqued the circles inside these squares, and I used my circular sewing tool, and I did a satin stitch around each cutout piece, and those turned out really nice, and that was really easy to do. I didn't have to, basically the machine did it for me. I didn't have to do it by hand or by, putting it through the machine and having to, move around the circle on my own. The circular sewing tool does that. And just for that, and there's more you can do with that tool, and I have reviewed that tool back, quite a few episodes ago. It is worth the money for it. I can't remember what I paid for it. I think it might have been about 80 bucks, but I'm not sure. But I don't regret spending that money on it. And the one that I have, I'm pretty sure will work. I haven't tried it yet. Keep meaning to do so. I think it'll work on my M7 as well. Kind of hoping it does, because that means I have to get another one, because this one will be useless. But no, I think it'll fit and it'll work well too. I'm pretty sure of it. Anyways, as I said, and you can't see it from way back there, but I quilted it. Now, I did use walking foot for this, and I just did wavy lines, but I went, and I'm famous for the wavy lines, you know that. I went down and then I went across, but I did not go in here. Now, I thought about doing some kind of free motion quilting or ruler foot quilting inside each one of these circles, but I changed my mind on that idea. I thought that might be a little much, and I kind of wanted the circles to be the focal of this quilt. So if I put some quilting in there, and that, people's eyes might be going to the quilting. Plus they're all like different colors, so do I switch color? You could, but that would be a pain in the butt. Like switching colors for each circle. So no, I just did wavy line. I did straight line too. I did near the ditch. I started that out doing straight line down and across. So each square has a little tiny border around it as well, done by the quilting. And then these larger pieces in the border, wavy, and I did a combination of wavy lines and straight lines back and forth, and wavy lines at the end of it. And then I bound it. Well, the binding part of it gave me a little bit of a problem. I don't know why. I mean, I've done binding on all kinds of quilts, and I've gotten pretty good at it, I think. And I have my routine for it, but everything started out wrong with this, and I just carried on with the wrongness. First of all, if you're binding a quilt, machine binding it, you should do the first machine stitching on the back of the quilt, and then pull it over to the front and stitch close to the edge of the binding on the front. And hopefully, and it's hit and miss for me, you will catch the binding on the back, and it won't be very obvious. But if you don't, and depending on the color of your quilt, the thread you're using, no one's going to notice that you missed a little bit, but because it's on the back. And most people don't look at the back of a quilt. So that's why you do it that way. Well, what did I do? I started on the front, and I got halfway around the quilt and realized, oh crap. And I've done this before. This is a common error that I make. I keep forgetting to start it on the back. But usually I catch myself within the first, inch or two, and it's easy to just unsew it and flip it over. Well, halfway around on this baby, no. So I just carried on with it. I ended up having to do a double stitch line on the binding. Now you really don't notice it because I was able to match the thread. I kept the thread very dark, and I was able to pretty much catch it in the binding on both sides. So you really don't notice the double stitching. But why did I do a double stitching? Because I didn't stitch close enough to the edge of the binding, and the edges of the quilt, the raw edges, in a few spots look like, well, once you wash the quilt, they might slip out from underneath the binding. They were secured, they were sewn, but there was extra. And I debated about taking scissors and trying to trim those off. And in one case I did, because yeah, it was out quite a bit. But I decided, no, I'm just going to go around it again with another line of stitching just much closer to the edge, and that'll secure it well. And it did. So it's okay. Am I as pleased with this quilt now that it's done as I hope to be? Well, I'm pleased with it. It's my own design. Again, I was using up scraps when I made this from the Stonehenge, Northcott Stonehenge line of fabric. It's my original design to a point, which always questions, do we make any original designs, or are they just variations on designs that have been around for a long time? It's kind of like music. Is there any new music anymore, or is it just variations on what's come from the past? So same idea here. But yeah, I was a little PO'd at myself about the binding. I do have a couple of tucks on the front, but luckily this fabric is such that those tucks really don't show up. I know they're there, but I'm not pointing them out to anybody. Again, that was because I was using the walking foot. And the fabric started to gather a little bit in some of the areas, and I tried my best so that wouldn't happen, but it did happen. But like I said, it happened in 2 or 3 spots. They're not huge tucks, and they're not that noticeable. So, it was a scrap quilt in a sense, a designer scrap quilt, I guess, because I did sort of, do some things to it to make it look a little bit unique. But we're not going to call those a mistake. We're going to call them customizations. They just add texture. Okay, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Let's have some coffee. Okay, there's another quilt behind this one that I want to show you, and I'll explain why I'm going to show it to you once I pull it out here. Let me pull up my pants. You don't need to see that. Okay, let's reveal this other quilt. Okay, here we are. I did this quilt some time ago. Fuzz. And I call it Roundabout. I'm not sure if that's the real name of it or not. I did it in a class, and I took this class at Ultimate Sewing to learn how to sew curves, because obviously there are a lot of curves. Well, essentially this is a drunkard's path block. Okay, if you look here, this is a drunkard's path block. They're a large block, and I had to sew this piece in, and I didn't do too bad. Most of them match up pretty good. I can spot the ones that don't, but it's not glaring. And it's a big quilt. It's a queen size. And I did take it to the long arm place, and I rented time on a long arm machine and did a pantograph design, because I really liked this quilt and I didn't want to blow it with my own attempt at free motion quilting. And I did it in there's another piece of string here. Come off. I did it in a light goldy colored of thread, and I think it turned out pretty nice. The quilting on it looks good, but I consider using a pantograph kind of cheating, but whatever gets you through it. But there's no way my free motion quilting, even on a long arm, would have been anywhere near as good as that. Not at all. And I'll show you the back. And the backing and the binding are the same fabric. And you can see a little bit maybe on the camera, some of my quilting coming through on that side. And of course, because I did it on a long arm, I did not have any, well, there's a tuck right there. Is that a tuck or is that just a, oh no, that's not a tuck. That's just a little wrinkle because it's been folded up on the guest bed for a while. So yeah, now, why am I showing you this? I'm not critiquing this quilt, although I just did a little bit of a critique on it. I am gifting this, okay. Excuse me for a minute while I untangle my cord. All right, I'm untangled. I am gifting this, all right. I'm having a real rough time today trying to stay on my stool and, oh, geez. Okay. Let me get myself collected here. Okay, I'm gifting this one. This is going to Walter's nephew and niece-in-law. And the reason it's going to them, now you know, I've got a bunch of quilts that I've been making. Over the last 3 years, I've probably made about 30 quilts or more. And they're all over my house. Many of them are on my guest bed, in my guest bedroom. Others are hanging up my quilt ladder. Some are neatly stacked on a chair that sits around our bistro table in the rec room. Still looking at the possibility of building our own quilt racks for that area. And when I say we, I mean Walter. And I keep bugging him about this. Someday I'll have them. And I've just kind of been, you know, they're my babies. I don't want to give them away. But you've heard me say that before. And the thing is, what am I going to do with all these quilts? They should be enjoyed by other people. So this one is my first one that's going out on its own. And it's going to, as I said, Walter's nephew and his nephew's wife. And the way that happened about is Walter was talking to his sister, which is his nephew's mother. And her husband, his brother-in-law, this gets complicated, mentioned the fact to his daughter-in-law, his son's wife, Walter's nephew's wife, that, you know, they had a new bed suite and she would like a quilt. And she said, well, Steve will make you one. Yes, Steve would make her one. But the thing with Walter's brother-in-law is he doesn't realize that there are some things you have to take into consideration. 1, I need to know the size of the bed. 2, I need to know her color scheme. 3, what kind of pattern would she like? There's some consultation that needs to be done here. Of course, the cost of the fabric and everything. Now, that doesn't bother me because I'd be buying the fabric no matter what. So that's fine. I don't care about that. But the brother-in-law said he'd pay for the fabric, but he has no idea how much the fabric costs. Like that quilt right there, that's in fabric alone is probably close to $250, $300. Okay, then there's your time and all of that kind of stuff. And even on this quilt, it cost me to rent the long arm machine, and it cost me $30 an hour, and this took 3 hours for me to quilt using a pantograph. So that was another $90 right there. And then there's the batting and there's the thread and all that kind of stuff. Now, I wouldn't charge family anyways, ever. I mean, I gift it, and this is a gift. But anyways, so we talked to, her name is Diane, and asked her, you know, what she was looking for. Well, they have a queen size, and they wanted a queen size one. Well, I don't make a lot of, like, well, queen size, you know, queen size have to take into consideration the drop, if, you know, the type of bed you have or whatever. So we took 3 pictures of quilts. This one and 2 UFOs I have hanging over there that have not yet been sandwiched and quilted, but they are pretty much queen size. One of them I would have had to add a couple of border pieces to it to make it fit her bed, but that's not a big deal. So we took pictures, we sent them off to her and said, you know, does one of these 3 appeal to you? Well, this one she liked. We actually put this on our bed, which is a queen size, and took a picture of it on the bed. And she said that was perfect. They just bought a 4-poster bed or something like that. And so that's great. I said, okay, it's yours. So she was supposed to come over on Sunday afternoon and pick it up, but she had forgot that her mother was coming in from out of town to visit, so I still have it. And I thought I'd take this opportunity while I still have it to show it to you and talk a little bit about it. So it's my first baby that's being gifted. I think that's broken the ice. I think I really should offer a quilt to my nephew and my niece, the ones that live out here. I would do the same for my niece and 2 nephews that live out west, but one of them is in England, living there right now. They're adults. The other one, she's married, and well, she's out west. She's in Abbotsford, and so is the other my other nephew too. And you know, shipping a quilt is actually very, very expensive. That doesn't mean it won't happen someday. It might, but we'll see. We'll see. I haven't spoken to that side of my family in a long time, like the kids, you know, because they have lives. And yeah, that's a story for another day. Okay, so that's what I had been working up with there. That is a really good English language sentence I just said. No, it's not. Okay, get on the ball here. All right. Here is an upcoming project once I can get the fabric. But Northcott, supposedly, I don't know if it's available yet, but it's they're announcing it that it is coming out at some point in time, and it's called City Lights. And all I have is a piece of paper here printed out to show you what it looks like. But it is a panel, a panel that you can cut into strips. And this is a pattern, a free pattern they have for it. And I really like the pattern. It's very modern. And I like the line of fabric. I can't get this fabric yet. I looked at my usual sources and around. I just don't think it's available in the quilt stores yet. But once it is, I intend to get it. In fact, I intend to buy pretty much the full line. And I'd like to make this quilt, but I really like the fabric itself, like the coordinating patterns that go with this, and so, you know, I'd like to buy that and specifically make a couple of quilts. This one, which is more of a wall hanging, I think, and then a full-size quilt as well. But I have to wait until that's available, so I'm keeping my eyes peeled, and I'm thinking of sending a note out to Peachtree Quilts in Regina and asking them if they're going to get that. I just ordered some fabric from them, and yeah, I'll talk about that in a moment. And of course to Ultimate Sewing to see, you know, what Shirley's got on order or when she's going to get this, because she does carry Northcott, and I'd rather buy it from Shirley anyway, simply because, you know, my relationship with Shirley. But in a pinch, I can always go to Peachtree as well, because I like them as well. Okay, so more coffee. What's that take me to? Yes. All right. On this week's demo, first of all, I was going to do a demo about how to keep your rulers from slipping, and I will still do that down the road. But I was watching a video, a YouTube thing, where they were doing an in the hoop applique kind of a thing, and I got thinking, yeah, I do a lot of in the hoop applique, as you know, with my embroidery machine. And I don't do it the way they do it. Go figure, right? Do I ever follow the rules? No. I just find the way that these instructions are written when you buy an in the hoop pattern, something like that, are very cumbersome and very time consuming, and a lot of stuff you don't need to do. Now, having said that, the reason I say that is because they're written for someone who's never done in the hoop applique before, and that's fine. And I would strongly suggest that if you're doing in the hoop applique, the first time you do it, follow the instructions. But after you've done a few of them, you're going to find your own shortcuts and your own way to do it that works best for you. So feel free to deviate from the instructions if it's working for you. So I thought I'd do a little demo showing you how I made this. Now what this is actually a coaster. It's supposed to be a coaster. It could be smaller. I did the very biggest one that they had in the hoop just for the sake of the visuals so you can see it. And this would make, you can make this into a hot mat. It's a nice little table decoration, you know, wall decor, whatever. But it's a very simple in the hoop applique, but I'm going to show you the process. So I did a video of the whole process from beginning to end, and I'm going to insert it in here right now. Today I'm going to show you how I do in the hoop applique. I don't really follow the rules or the suggestions that are made by the companies that you buy these patterns from. I think this one was a freebie that came from Creative Kiwi, it is, and it's a leaf coaster. And these are a lot of fun to do. I enjoy doing in the hoop applique, but most of the time these designs ask you to trace out or print out a template that you lay down on your fabric, and it has the basic shape of what you're going to be stitching, and then you match that up. And I find that a very cumbersome part. Also, when you get to the satin stitch that goes all the way around the outside of it, if you haven't cut accurately, you may have pieces of your fabric hanging out from your stitching, and you don't want that. So I'm going to show you how I do it. Now, this is not necessarily the absolute right way, but it works for me. So what do I need? Well, I've got my instructions here, which I am going to pretty much ignore, except that I've checked down here. They usually tell you how much fabric you need and what hoop you need. And I'm going to do the largest one because I want you to be able to see it well. So I'm going to use the 8x8 hoop, which I have right here for the Janome 550E. You need a couple of sheets of water-soluble stabilizer, and this is what I have right here that I'm going to put in the hoop. Now, how do I determine how much stabilizer I use? Well, usually I double whatever the pattern calls for. I find that works better. But my rule of thumb, which gives me a good guide, is depending on the number of total stitches in the pattern, and this goes for embroidery or in the hoop, anything like that. If it's 8,000, for every 8,000 stitches, I have another sheet of stabilizer, and oftentimes I'll put an extra one. So for example, if it's this pattern is 10,000 plus stitches, I'm going to use 2 pieces of stabilizer. I might float a third piece underneath the hoop as well, just for extra security. Water-soluble stabilizer is great, as you'll see, because I'll show you how it comes right out of the finished product. And again, I don't do it exactly the way that the instructions tell you to do it. So I have my stabilizer. I need a couple of pieces of fabric. It says on here they should be 9x9. I usually cut them a little bigger than that. And I'm using 2 of the same fabric here. One will be for the top design. The other one's for the backing of this design. Because in this case, because this is a coaster, you want to have a backing on it as well. And they suggest a thin piece of batting, which you can use, but I like to use Battleizer for things like this, which is a thin batting, but it's a little denser than most batting you would use in a quilt. But you can use quilting batting, no problem. The other thing I need is some thread. Well, for this design, I've picked this thread, and I'm only going to use one color for this, because this is a very simple design. But of course, you would pick out your colors and as many of them that you need for whatever design you're doing. And these are your most important tool for this. These duckbill scissors. And you'll see why. I'll show you how I use these to trim the fabric once we've got some embroidering done. So what I'm going to do now, and I'm just going to take you around here, and here's the machine. It's the 550E, and I've already loaded up my pattern. And this is what it looks like. But the one thing you can do too is by pushing this button, I can see this step by step. When it's in this mode, you're seeing the whole pattern. So you can see we don't have a lot of stitching in this because there's the veins of the leaf, and then there's the satin stitch that goes all the way around the outline of the leaf. So I prefer to look at it step by step, and it coordinates to these steps that are here, which also give you suggestions for colors. These are Janome colors. I use Floriani, so I have a little app on my phone that allows me to convert the Janome numbers to the Floriani numbers or close thereof. I oftentimes just look at the overall pattern and decide on my colors myself without doing any kind of conversion. I just pick what I like, and that's okay. You can do that. So I'm all set up here, except I haven't got my hoop in and I haven't put in my thread yet. So I'm going to hoop up my stabilizer, and I'll show you what the next step of this is. So I have my stabilizer hooped. I have 2 sheets of it in the hoop, but I also floated a 3rd sheet underneath the hoop. And floating just means putting a piece without attaching it to the hoop underneath. And I find that gives me a fair amount of stability. Now, one of the things I don't like when I'm doing one of these, but I am going to do it today, is the outline. Oftentimes I will skip this step because I know my fabric's going to fill the hoop, and so my pattern is going to be well within the parameters of the fabric. However, they do this because if you want to use less fabric, this is one way to save on fabric. I don't worry about that too much, but I am going to do the outline with this right now. So I'm going to start it. Now you can see this is a really large pattern, and that's okay. I want it this large. You might not want it this large as a coaster, but this might be a little mug rug or something like that. I'm making it this size today so you can get a very clear view of what I'm doing. So there it has put the outline of where my fabric goes, and as I said, I've cut it bigger than what I need, so I'm just going to float the fabric on top of this, and I'll show you what that looks like. So I've laid my fabric down on top of my hoop, and I did not secure it in the hoop. I'm just floating it on top. That's what it means. When you don't secure it in the hoop, it's called floating. And I'm ready for what's called the tack down stitch. And this will do the same thing as you just saw a second ago, but it'll go all the way around on top of the fabric and seal it. So we don't need to watch that. I'll come back and show you what you do with that in a moment. Oops, I left out a step. I forgot that this particular pattern has to have a piece of batting or battleizer underneath the fabric for the tack down, because you're going to tack down both the top fabric and the battleizer at the same time. So I took it off here, off the hoop again, and I laid down my battleizer, and I've laid down my top fabric, and now I can stitch the tack down line, and I'll come back and show you what that looks like. Okay, it may be a little bit difficult to see, but you can see I have the same outline again. Now this is tacked down onto my stabilizer, both the battleizer and the top fabric. So what happens next is I'm going to put the veins on, but I'm still leaving it in the hoop. I'm not going to worry about the fact that I have excess fabric. I'll show you how to get rid of that after this step. So I'm just going to start this again. I'm using the same color. I mean, that would be up to you, but for the sake of this demo, I'm using the same color, and away we go. Oops. And this machine, when it does that, reminds me that I have to lower my presser foot. And there we go. And here we go. So I'm going to let it do its thing right now, and I'll come back and show you the final result. The next thing I have to do with this applique, because it does have a backing to it, is to take my background fabric and put the wrong face down, and then I'm going to slide it under the hoop and make sure that it covers the entire area where the design is stitched out, and also that there aren't any wrinkles in it. And then I'm going to stitch that outline that I started with again, and that's going to secure the backing to the front. You want to be careful with this, that you don't have any wrinkles or folds in your fabric underneath. You can take the hoop out, put your fabric onto the back of the hoop with the wrong side facing into the hoop, and then just take some masking tape or painter's tape and just tape around the edges. But I find that sometimes that curls up my tape, and that causes me more problems than just floating it. If you're careful, it can be floated. I'll show you what it looks like in a second. So I have the fabric, backing fabric, underneath the hoop right now. It's floating. I didn't use any tape. I double checked to make sure that there aren't any fold overs of the stabilizer or of the backing fabric, and now I'm ready to stitch that outline again. Now in some programs that you get, it'll actually stop the machine and let you know that that's when you should be putting the backing on. This particular program did not, but it's a freebie, so that's probably why there's not that many instructions there. But I've done this before, so I know what to expect. So I'm going to start up the outline stitch again. It'll go over the outline stitch on the top, but that's okay because that's going to be covered up with a satin stitch, and it just gives a little extra reinforcement anyways to the final product. So let's start it. So I've taken the hoop off the machine and I've turned it over, and you can't see it because it's very light, but I have my outline that's tacking down my backing fabric, which this is right now, to the rest of the front fabric and the stabilizer. So now I'm going to trim around that, and that's where these scissors come in really handy, the duckbill ones, because you can get in very close to your stitches. This may be a little awkward for you to see. But what I'm going to do is I have the scissors this way, and then I come very close to the stitches. In fact, what I do is, oops, I'm cutting some of the stabilizer, I don't want to do that. I sort of pull gently on the fabric as I go around, and it pulls away from the edge of the stitches. So if you're cutting something that has some curves in it, and this does, it comes out very easily. Now be careful you don't cut the stitches themselves. However, if you do accidentally cut one or two, there shouldn't be a problem, because this is going to go around and do a satin stitch that will cover up these little tack down stitches. The other thing you want to make sure you do is get as close as you can to the stitches as well, because if you are too far away, your satin stitches, depending on how wide they were designed, will actually allow some of the fabric to peek through them, and you don't want that look, because that'll look very ragged and messy. And just take your time. The first couple of times you do this, this will feel very awkward. But as time goes by, you'll get very used to it. And quite frankly, I kind of like doing this. I don't know why, but I do like it. So I'm going to carry on and go all the way around on this, and I'll show you the end result when I return. So there's the end result, and oftentimes you have little pieces of thread on the back here. I just take a lint roller and I just gently go over that, and that picks up the pieces. Now occasionally you might see, and you probably can't see this, but a little fraying part coming out, I just trim those off as well. So now what I need to do is flip it over, and I'm going to do the same procedure as I did on the back with the scissors. I'm going to cut around the outline, but I'm also going to cut the battleizer or the batting, whichever you used, on the back. Now you can do this at the same time, or you can do the fabric first and then the batting. It's whatever you're comfortable with. So I'm going to start this process and show you the end result. So I've finished trimming all the way around the edge, and at this point too you might want to take a close look at it, and anything, especially the batting, that might be hanging out a little bit too far. A little bit too far is probably more than 1/8 of an inch. You want to shave that down with your scissors. If you take the time doing that at this stage, then your final product is going to look a lot better, and your satin stitching is going to look much tighter and much neater. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it back on the embroidery machine and do the final satin stitching. Okay, so I've returned my hoop to the embroidery machine, and I'm on the very last stitch, which is the satin stitch, which will go all the way around here. So I'll just get it started and let you see that, and then I'll show you what you do after the satin stitching is done. So now the embroidery machine is doing the final loop around with the actual satin stitching. It went around once and did sort of a zigzag stitch just to secure everything. And now it's doing the zigzag stitch. And this is going to take it a little bit of time. And so I'll come back and show you the finished product. So I've taken the leaf out of the hoop, and I've trimmed the stabilizer all the way around. I left a little bit. I didn't get too close to the stitches. Now, what they usually recommend is, because it's water soluble, is to trim as close as you possibly can to the satin stitches without cutting the stitches, of course, and then taking a wet Q-tip and going around the edges to dissolve any of the remaining stabilizer. Well, I find that very tedious, and inadvertently I usually end up cutting some of the satin stitches that way. So instead, what I do, as I've already mentioned, I put it into a basin full of warm water, and I let it soak there for about 25 to 30 seconds, swish it around. That dissolves all of the remaining stabilizer, and then I lay it flat to dry. I often put it between a couple of sheets of, kitchen towel, as they say in paper towels. That's the word I want. Been watching too many British YouTube channels. And just put a hot iron on top of those paper towels just to squish out a little bit of the extra moisture and let it dry. And it usually dries fairly fast, but it will definitely dry and be ready the next day. Now, depending on how much of the stabilizer you wash out of this will dictate how stiff the final product is. If it's something like a coaster or a pot holder, you probably want it to be a little bit stiff, but each time it gets washed, it'll get a little softer, and you can press it with your iron. So that's how I do in the hoop applique. And there's the finished product. I've got all the stabilizer out of it now. It's still a little bit damp, but I'll just leave it laying flat to dry for a few hours and it'll be done. So you could use, instead of batting or battleizer, you could use Insulbright if you want to make this, say, a pot holder. That would insulate it a little bit better from your table, from the heat. But whatever, I think it turned out really nice, and that's how you do it. So as I said in the video, you have the water-soluble stabilizer, and you can plunge the whole thing into a sink and rinse it out. And the more you rinse it out, the softer it will get. I tend to like to have these kind of things fairly stiff, so you can see this is very stiff. However, I can dunk it back into the sink of water, I can throw it in the washing machine. And if you throw it in the washing machine, you're going to get a lot of the stabilizer out of it then. But then, of course, you're going to have to press it as well, which is probably not a problem, but it just depends on how stiff you want these kind of things. I use water-soluble stabilizer for a lot of projects, and I love it. And that is something else I deviate from, as you heard in the video. Many of them will show you taking a cotton swab and wetting it and going around the edges to take off the stabilizer. Well, you want to know something? I can't be bothered with that. In the sink of water it goes, and it comes out like this. Okay, so what's that take us to? That takes us to the subscribers quilt of the week. And this is done by Donna Van de Bogart. I hope I said her last name right, and I'm going to put it in here so you can see her wonderful work. This week's subscribers quilts come from Donna Van de Bogart, I think. Sorry, Donna, if I've mispronounced your name. She says this is what she's been working on this week, all quilted with her embroidery machine. All my quilts have been given away. So Donna's got some table runners here that are very nice, using a Dresden design and a shell design. She lives in Southern Tier, New York, just south of the Finger Lakes. And she also says that, I'm just looking here, it says, the shell runners were my first attempt at trapunto quilting. I have not yet tried trapunto quilting. Trapunto quilting, for those of you that may not be familiar with it, is basically extra layers of quilting, and it's a very dense quilting that makes things rise up from the surface of the quilt a little bit higher than normal. That's probably not the best description of it, but that's my description of it. And it looks really textured and very bold. It really stands out, and you can see that in her shell runners. The Dresden was one my mother started cutting the blades before she passed 5 years ago. It was one I especially want to finally get done, which is a nice memory piece, I think. You know, having those from her mother, they mean something special, I'm sure, to Donna. So Donna, what you have created on your embroidery machine and with the trapunto are really, really beautiful, and thanks so much for sharing them with us. So I'm starting to run out of, actually I think I may have run out of, no, I think I have one set left of, you know, quilts that have been submitted to me, or craft work. It doesn't just have to be quilts. It can be anything in the fiber textile line. You know, knitting, crocheting, cross stitch, needlepoint, quilting, garment sewing. Whatever you're doing that's textile. Send me some pictures of what you've been working on. Give me a brief explanation of it, a brief description of it, and I will feature you on here as well. I love seeing other people's work. It's great. It's like having a little mini quilt show. Because as I've said, I don't want this just to be all about me. It tends to be, but you know, I'd like to bring you in as well. Okay, so please consider submitting some pictures of your work and tell me a little bit about it. And you've got my email address is in my show notes. It's always there, so feel free to send me whatever. Okay, speaking of the show notes, there's also a link, of course, to Ultimate Sewing. And Ultimate Sewing came through, as you know, for the retreat in, you know, a very generous way. And I'm going to talk about the aftermath of the retreat a little bit later on near the end of today's video. And there's also a link for Riley Blake Designs, because I am going to talk about their YouTube channel in a moment. And there's a link to the Stitcharie, which is this week's quilting shop online. So let's go to Riley Blake Designs. Everybody, I'm sure, has heard of Riley Blake Designs. They've been around for years. They always have new fabric lines and things like that, and patterns and everything else to go with it. But they do have a YouTube channel, and the thing is, many of the major fabric designers have YouTube channels, and really, you should check them out. Now, for a long time, I didn't bother because, you know, I just figured it's a sales pitch for their fabrics. And yes, it is. But They have expanded these YouTube channels to not just include new lines of fabric, but what to do with them, different ideas and techniques. And so they're really a good source of information. So Riley Blake Designs falls in that category, and I have put, as I said, the link is in the show notes, but it's really worth checking them out because they give you tutorials, they give you tips and techniques, things that you might want to learn how to do. And yeah, you get to see their fabric. And the beauty of seeing their fabric is they're showing their fabric in finished projects as well as just the fabric itself. And sometimes it's hard to visualize what a fabric line is going to look like unless you see it already created into a quilt or something like that. For example, this one I showed you from Northcott City Lights, if I had just seen that panel on there, I don't think I would have been that interested, because panels I'm not that interested in general. But when I saw it made into that quilt, then I got really interested and I explored it further and decided, yeah, I kind of like this line. I would like to get my hands on it. So, by going to a designer, fabric designer's YouTube channel, the same thing could happen for you. So check it out. Okay. Speaking of fabrics, all right, I got out one of my patterns that I showed you a couple of weeks ago called No Diamonds in the Sky, okay? And I have already decided I was going to do that quilt out of the Fairy Frost line of fabrics. I think those are by Robert Kaufman. I think they are. Anyways, I had ordered all of this fabric from Peachtree Quilts back a while ago, and I thought I had enough. Well, I got looking at the pattern, I pulled it out, I thought I'd get started on that pattern, and realized, no, I am missing a couple of the colors. I need more of the fabric. Now, I was a little worried I might not be able to get them, because the last time I ordered some of that from Peachtree, they were out. Of a couple of the ones that I wanted. But I took a chance, I went online and I ordered what I need, and they have shipped it. It's on its way, and that's great, because I really want to get started on that particular quilt. But in the meantime, I have decided, and I think I've shown you this pattern before, the Carpenter's Wheel. This was a free pattern designed by Donna Jordan of Jordan Fabrics, which is, you can go onto YouTube and their website, and they have lots and lots of free patterns. I don't really like the color combination that's in, well, that's not true. I think the one is the light purple. It looks more like pink. But I do like the design. So I pulled out some fabric for this, and they talk about cutting strips. And they're making the strips, I think, they're cutting squares out of the strips 2 5/8 in size and this kind of thing. And I don't like working with 1/8 of an inch when it comes to cutting, because you got to be very careful. Yeah, some of the rulers come with 1/8 of an inch marks on them, but they're not easy to see. I usually end up using some of that tape. You could just use masking tape, but there's a tape you can buy that is reusable, and you can put it down on your ruler along that line where you're going to cut, so you'll see it. It's a visual. But I just don't like cutting things in 1/8 of inches. So I had a pack of strips, 40 strips, in a color scheme that I really like, blues and purples, of course. And I showed that to you when I showed you this back a few weeks ago, this pattern, that's what I had in mind to use. So I pulled those out, and I'm altering the design slightly in the measurements. Instead of doing 2 5/8, I'm doing 2.5 inch squares, because they're strips and they're already 2.5 inches long. Easier to cut. Now I have to make a lot of half square triangles for this, and they do show a layout. Let me just show it to you. This is the layout, and you do it by quadrants. So each one of these is the same, just turned at like about 45 degrees. So it's all marked on here where everything is supposed to go. So right now I'm working on the first quadrant, and I've almost got all the half square triangles that are needed for this made. I'm using white as the background color here, sort of a tone-on-tone white. And this is my little box right here of half square triangles. So you can see the size I'm working with. They're not huge. They measure, what, about, let me grab one here and just measure it on my mat. Yeah, well, they're just, as I said, they're 1, 2, 2. Get this in the right spot. They actually work out to 2 and 3. No, wait, that's not right. 1, 2. They actually work out to 2 1/4 inch squares. Now, of course, that means that the final product is not going to be the size that they say it's going to be, but that's okay, because this should work, even though I'm playing with the dimensions. And it may be a little smaller at the end, but I can do things with it. I can add more borders to it or whatever. And they're doing a pieced border. I know it's difficult for you to see here, but I may follow that along as well. So that's what I've started working on. And I'm going to continue later on today with that as well. And we'll see how that turns out. I'm pretty much the master of half square triangles, I can tell you that. I've done a lot of them. But then again, anybody who's quilted for a while, they've done a lot of them as well, because half square triangles are basically a basic element of a lot of quilts. So I'll keep you up to date on my progress with that quilt. So what have I got? Okay, this week's quilt that I did, I called it Quilted in the Hoop. It is a quilt I made some time ago that I actually used the 15,000 to quilt it, using it in the hoop quilting design for it, which worked out on this particular quilt pretty well. So I'm going to insert that right here. This week's quilt that I'm going to critique is one that's original to me. This was not a pattern, although it was based on a pattern. And again, I just had a jelly roll strip sitting around, and I decided to change it into a quick throw of a quilt. And this is what I did. And actually, the colors in this are really quite nice as I look at it now. And from a distance, it looks like I did a pretty good job. But let's get up close and personal with it and see if I can pick it apart. So let's look right here at one of the most common errors that people make are matching up their points or cutting them off. Now, this is a quilt that I made probably about a year ago, and I've had lots of experience with points. However, these particular ones were done with strips that were cut on the bias and put together and then matched up with another strip. And let's see. Well, the points on these two strips do match up pretty good. Let's carry on. That one, not so good. But the thing is, when you're back from distance from it, you really won't notice that unless you're looking for it. How about the next one? That one could have been a little closer. Now, of course, I'm being very, very critical. That's perfect. And let's go down a little bit. And you can see for the most part, I got most of the points matched up pretty well. So I'm very pleased with that. Then I guess I decided that I would start putting borders on. So to break up that center part, I put a white border, which is a good idea because it gives a place for the eye to rest, because this is a very, very busy quilt. So no criticism here about this at all. And then I branched out and I did a pieced border with some, looks like 5-inch, 2.5 by 5-inch strips. Now, if we take a look, this is where my mathematics went awry, because I had to piece a smaller strip up here in the corner to make it fit. But at least I was consistent, because I did the same thing here and I did the same thing here. Now here's a problem though. You notice this one? It doesn't really match up with the seam on there, so it looks a little off balance. Now if that had been a lighter color, you might not have noticed that. Did I do it over here? comes close, but not exact. And I'm looking at the other corners, and yeah, I was not consistent at all. That's a larger piece up there. So yeah, that's called fudging it, and I did. But overall, when you look at this from a distance, you really don't notice that. Your eye does not fall on that. So it's hidden. And then I carried on with another very simple border on the outside. I did the darker colors at the top and the lighter colors along the bottom. That's with the gold. And then I thought I'd get fancy, and I put in this little diagonal piece. And I did match that all the way around, except I'm noticing this one and the matching one go in the same direction, and so do the top and the bottom. I'm just wondering if it would have been better if I'd kept everything going around almost like a pinwheel. This one would go this way, then the one at the top would be the opposite way. It would be facing towards the right instead of the left. And then this one could stay the same. But this one, okay, so the only one out of whack here, when I look at this and analyze it, is that top one. If I'd done that from the right or the left, okay, I'm getting confused. You know what I mean? If you look here, you see there's we'll start here. That's going out. The top point's going out. Top point to the left. Then that one should have gone out to the left too. And then that one could stay where it is. No. Okay, I'm getting myself confused. All right, let's just leave it as it is, okay? And let's take a look at the outside border. And it's all the same color. It might have been nicer if I had mitered the corners of this. However, I see a problem. See this bottom purple border? The size of it? Let's look at the top. Why did I do that? Those two borders are very different. Well, not very different. They're using the same fabric. But I mean, that one's wider. It's almost twice as wide as this bottom one. The only thing I can think of is, after I got it all quilted and I was squaring it up, for some reason I took more off this end than I did at the top. That's not good. So yeah, that should have been the same width. Now let's take a look at my binding. Binding looks pretty good. Stitching is fairly straight. What about the corners? Let's see here. Mitered corner. Oops, get my hand out of the way. Yes, a nice mitered corner there. How about the other side? Nice mitered corner there, and looking up at the top, I can't get up that close to it, but those both look pretty good as well. Now let's talk about the quilting. I'll show you up close. Very evenly done, very professional looking. Not done as free motion. This was done in the hoop in my quilting or in my sewing machine. So as I've said before, you can use the quilting machine to do edge-to-edge quilting, but I wouldn't recommend doing it for anything that's very large. And this was a reasonable size, so that's why I did it. And I do like the quilting. It turned out very nice. Now let's see what I did with the back. I need another set of hands here, but this gives you an idea. Okay, in the center, I did this. And the quilting here looks nice on the back with that particular fabric. But I did decide to use more of the strips, and I pieced a couple of borders and one at the bottom as well. And actually, I think that the backing looks pretty nice. So overall, my opinion of this quilt, maybe I should start rating them and giving them a number. I would give this one an 8 out of 10. The major flaws in this quilt are in my design, in terms of the mathematics. But overall, I think it's a really nice quilt. And this one sits on the back of a couch in my rec room. it's just very bright, very colorful. So that's the Quilt in the Hoop quilt for this week's critique. So next week, another one of my quilts that I will cut up for you. Okay, let's talk about online quilt stores. I found one called the Stitcharie. It's spelled Stitcharie, Stitcharie, and I have the link for it in the show notes. So I have never ordered anything from this store. It is a Canadian store, online Canadian store, and I just have never gotten around to it. I should order some from it to check them out. They do have a physical store. They're near Sarnia, Ontario, in a place called Petrolia, I think. Never been there. According to the map, it's just a small little place, a little bit east of Sarnia. So it's a ways from me. So visiting the actual store is not going to happen anytime soon. Well, for a variety of reasons, obviously. But no. But on their online, their fabric is average price. It looks like about $16 to $20 Canadian a meter. And they had a good variety too. They have a lot of notions as well, and a good variety of those. And they even sell knitting supplies, at least knitting needles. I didn't really notice if they sold wool. I didn't see that on there, but they did have some knitting needles. They sell patterns. They had quite a few patterns, and both quilting patterns, but they also sell garment patterns as well, which is interesting, I found. Because a lot of times when you go to these online quilting stores, they are for quilters. They don't deal with materials for garment sewing. So I noticed, I think they also had fabric for garment sewing. I must tell Walter about that. They had a good variety of threads too. They had Aurifil, they had Glide, they had a lot of the major brands of thread too. And their prices on all of these things are pretty much in the ballpark for standard pricing. They did have other things like bag making supplies. They had pre-cuts, they had kits as well. And I checked out their shipping, and they said standard shipping, it looks like it's a flat rate of $10 if you live in Canada. I'm not sure about that. That seems really, really reasonable. That's cheap. That's cheap. But that's what it looked like. I was a little confused about how they were pricing their shipping. So that's what I gathered from it, but I would say send them an email and ask them more specifically, especially if you're outside of Canada, because I have no idea what they would charge for to be shipped to the States. So overall, I'm very impressed with their website. Great variety. I can't say anything about their customer service because, as I said, I have not ever ordered anything from them. So I must give that a try and see what that's all about. So that's the Stitcharie. Okay, so just yesterday I went fairly extensively on my vlog and on Stephen and Walter Live and talked about the aftermath of the retreat. So I'm not going to rehash all those things I said there, and if you're interested, you can check those out. What I am going to say though, I'm really impressed with myself. I ran a great retreat. I'm not the only one that said that. I had a lot of emails telling me that they had a great time and they really loved the retreat and can't wait until the next one. So that is an ego booster, right? I mean, I am patting myself on the back because I worked hard. And that was the end result that I was aiming for, is that everybody would have a really good time and things would run very smoothly. And it did. So I'm pleased with that. So pleased that yes, I am going to run another retreat, but not tomorrow, not next week, nor next month. The next retreat is not probably going to be until the fall. Why, you say, so far apart? Well, a couple of reasons. One, distance makes the heart grow fonder. If I ran another one of these retreats in a month's time, yeah, I'd probably get people coming out and they'd be excited about it. But if you run them too close together, then the novelty of the idea wears out. And so I don't want that to happen. Second of all, the warmer weather here where we live is starting. And even though we're still, having the restrictions of COVID and that kind of thing, people will tend to want to get outside when the weather is nice, especially for those of us that live in this country, because we don't have a lot of months of really nice weather, like warm weather. So people want to get out and about. And as people get vaccinated and things like that, I think there's going to be a little bit more movement. So people don't want to be trapped in their house sewing. I sew all year round, but I know some people who do not sew in the summer at all. They are doing other things. They save their quilting for the winter months. Me, it's all year round. In fact, what I do, this is a little aside, squirrel, is we have an enclosed area under our deck, which is where our hot tub is, and we have a little patio out there, and it's, you know, under a roof kind of a thing. And I will go out on a nice summer's day. I have taken a collapsible table out there, put my sewing machine on it, and quilt it out there. And it's all screened in as well, which, you know, it's kind of nice because I back onto a forest, and so, you know, you have all of that as well. It's just a little different environment. Instead of in a room that really only has one little window in it in here and is a little bit closed in. So I will do that in the summer months too. But back to the retreat. So I'm thinking that possibly end of September, 1st of October would be a good time to have one again, sort of a pre-Christmas kind of retreat, because at that point in time, people are then thinking about projects that they're making for Christmas. So I think that would be a good time to have it. But do watch here for announcements of that. Now, someone asked, why not throw, you know, sort of a mini sewing retreat or sew day or something like that, that's only maybe, you know, half a day and long or something, not as formal and that kind of thing. Well, I kind of already do that. If you're a regular viewer, you'll know what I'm talking about. The first Wednesday of every month I do Craft and Chat. And Craft and Chat is where people who are working on quilts, sewing projects, art projects, crafting projects, anything like that, they can come on to the Zoom. I send out the link a week before on all of my channels. And it's very informal. You don't have to register for it. You just show up when you want to. And it starts at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, my time, Eastern Standard Time, and runs until about 4 o'clock. So it's about 4 hours. And I have some regulars who come every month to that, and we're adding to it. We had some new people last month. But if you're interested in that kind of thing, it's during the week, I know, so it's not good for those of you that are still working. But everybody's welcome. And like I said, you don't have to register for it. You don't have to let me know that you intend to be showing up. You just show up. And you'll hear more about it. I always announce it a week before. And so the next one comes up, first Wednesday in April is April the, I think it's April 6th. Something like that. Whatever the first Wednesday of April is, that's when it'll be. So I already do that as well. However, I am thinking, if I get bored, because these little retreats are all about me, yes and no, I might run some informal sew days on a weekend, like on a Saturday sometime. I'll give you like a week or 2 weeks notice before that happens, and it'll be the same sort of thing as a Craft and Chat. You won't have to pre-register for it or anything like that. You just show up if you're interested. And it would only be like maybe, you know, not necessarily the full day. I might start it at something like 10 or 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time in the morning, and run it until maybe 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, depending. So there won't be prizes, there won't be games, you will not get to see, you know, Matilda and Gladass. It'll just be an opportunity to, you know, get some things done. I don't know yet, but when I know, I'll let you know. Okay? The third reason I'm not going to have it, the big retreat again until come the early part of the fall, is that I have to do some planning again. I got to find prizes. I have some ideas about how to do this. And again, I talked about all of this on my vlog yesterday, so you can check that out. So anyways, I really, the retreat went well. I was very pleased with it. I was very tired afterwards, but that was okay. It was a good kind of tired. And I really appreciate the support and the thank yous that came through from many, many of the people who attended the retreat. We had a really good turnout, 81 out of 90 spots. That's darn good. I really didn't expect that. So, anyways, if you weren't there, you missed a good time. Maybe you'll make the next one. Okay, so a couple of other things just before I sign off here. Walter came up with this idea, and I liked it, about doing a episode about what we've learned about our sewing machines, like how to buy a sewing machine for the first time, what we have learned, the do's and don'ts, things like that, and talking about the two principal machines that we use. He uses a 6700P Janome, and of course I have the Continental M7, but I also have my Skyline S7, and we have our embroidery machines and things like that. So that in itself is a show. So we're going to do it as a special edition of the Idiot Quilter, and it may come out this week. In fact, as I'm telling you this right now, it's Tuesday morning. I'm thinking actually maybe this afternoon we will do this. We'll see. We have some other things to do too. So it'll be today or tomorrow probably. So possibly by the end of the week, don't hold me to that, but possibly to the end of the week, we will have a special edition of the Idiot Quilter featuring everything we know about sewing machines and then some. Okay? So if you're interested in that, watch for that coming up. And I'm thinking of starting a new segment here on the Idiot Quilter called Wally Sews. Now, if you're a regular viewer of my vlog every week, you know I have a regular segment called Wally Cooks. So now I thought I should share Wally Sews because he sews a lot and he's very, very good. And of course, his sewing is men's garments. So I thought there would be a niche out there that might be interested in that kind of thing. So watch for that. The first one of Wally Sews segments will probably appear in next week's Idiot Quilter episode. Okay, so that's it for me today. So send me your pictures of your sewing so I can feature them on here. Check out the show notes for great links, and have a great week. I hope you get some sewing done. I hope that puts you in a happy place when you do it. And as always, stay happy, stay healthy, stay in for a little bit longer. We're coming to the end of this situation we're in right now. Have a good one. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye for now.